Good evening, sports fans. Tonight we have a special episode here on Sports for All, and we are very privileged to have with us tonight the author and writer the life and showboat the life of Kobe Bryant here. And I'd like to introduce viewers to Roland Lazenby.
All right.
Thank you, sir. And Brian and my co-host Brian Yalung.
Good evening. Good evening to everybody.
Okay, let's get right to it. Okay, Mr. Lazenby, first of all, thank you for being here with us. Um, uh, you're busy with writing another icon's biography, and we'd like us and our viewers would like to get to know more of your work. And my first question is, um, you covered Michael for 30 years as what's written in the book. And my first of two questions is, how did you meet Michael, and what were your initial impressions of him?
I first want to thank you for having me on and to express um, the high regard I have for all of basketball culture in the Philippines. Coach Tim Cone recently came to the U.S. He has been such a big part of my basketball education.
I see.
And for years, the great Tex Winter, who coached Michael longer than anyone, afforded me the opportunity to learn, which is really important for any journalist or anyone trying to write about a game. And of course, we lost Tex Winter a few years back. And before that, he had been debilitated. And, the primary guy really stepping up and continuing my education has been Tim Cone. And that is no small thing. So first I want to express just how important Philippine basketball culture has been to me. And it's not that I'm able to observe the league there up close, but my ability to visit with him, his generosity with me has been a tremendous thing. So this is an honor for me. And I will tell you that I was covering a University of Virginia, University of North Carolina game in early 1993. Excuse me, 1983. It's been that many years. And I've been writing all morning on the life of Magic Johnson, so I'm changing gears here. It was in early 1983, and it was a stupendous game with going back and forth between the Virginia Wahoos and the North Carolina Tar Heels. And in that game, Michael made the most astounding play I'd ever seen him make, and one that, in fact, surprised and astounded Michael himself, as he explained to me years later. But I met him that day in the role of a journalist among a crowd of journalists, interviewing in the locker room after the game. So while it was memorable to me, I was just another face in the crowd at that time. But being able to watch him up close for the first time, and I'd seen a fair amount of basketball by then, but watching that play, who could have imagined I would stumble into that first game and see one of the all-time plays
and you've covered him ever since.
Yes, off and on. Billy Packer, who was a very prominent American college basketball broadcaster, and I did 5 books together, starting during that period, including a history of the Final Four. So that was part of it, but I quickly moved into writing about the NBA, starting in 1987. And so there was, and I was writing about the Celtics and the Pistons, specifically during that period. And there was Michael and the Bulls visiting those places or covering them on the road. That was a pitched battle in the Eastern Conference of the NBA in the late 80s. So those games were something to witness live and to cover.
So okay, now let's move over to Kobe. How did you meet Kobe?
I was there in Charlotte, North Carolina, in December of 1996, when Kobe visited with the Lakers and scored his first NBA field goal. And it was a 3-pointer, and he bounced into the locker room afterward and hit me with a soul shake. He was really excited. And he had no idea who I was, as I've explained before. I was just some reporter there with a microphone and a notebook. But he was so excited. And I had set out that season, I was doing a small book on the next generation of players coming into the NBA and sort of looking at the situation as if they were all taking the Jordan test. And I had identified 6 or 7 players. It's funny, they were all rookies or second-year players. I took a close look at Allen Iverson. I took a close look at Kobe Bryant in that book. It was called Yo Baby, It's Attitude was the name of the book. It's just a paperback. Ray Allen, an array of those kinds of players. And I was there in their very first moments, encountering first the league or Michael. I was there in the United Center in Chicago, standing in the hallway with Ray Allen. He was a rookie. It was a preseason game against the Bulls, and Jordan was his idol. And I was sitting there talking with Ray Allen. I've had some special moments in my career about him going onto the court for the first time to challenge this guy that he had way up on the pedestal. And so it was fun to see his success in that first game. And Jordan always had a mirthful response to these guys. And of course, with Kobe, it ended up being garbage time in that meeting, in those early meetings. And being there in Chicago for those battles, I had already done a lot of Lakers work by then. And Larry Drew was an assistant coach on those teams when Kobe was in his first and second seasons. And Larry Drew was the kind of guy I could talk with, and he would sort of tell me. And this was before we all knew Kobe was this splashy young player, but there were a lot of reasons to have doubts about him back then. And there was a lot that was misunderstood about Kobe. And Larry Drew, I remember him telling me in a one-on-one interview over to the side, people don't line up to interview assistant coaches. They always have to have the TV camera on the stars or the head coach. And I made my career by learning from assistant coaches. And and to the point now that the NBA restricts assistant coaches. You can't just have conversations a lot of times with them. They have to be very guarded in their comments. But back then, that's where I went. because I could get, to be successful as a journalist, you have to have very high level information. You have to learn things that other people don't know. And so I would go to the assistant coaches and they would be my guides. That's how I became very close with Tex Winter. Nobody was lining up to talk to Tex Winter when I was writing about the Bulls, and I would spend hours with him. And that went on for years, through all the Lakers years he coached. I introduced Tex and Kobe. So my conversation with Larry Drew that day in the locker room in Chicago, he was telling me more about Kobe than I'd seen that first night. He was going, at first he joked, he's like a puppy just let out of a box, and explaining the young Kobe coming into Los Angeles. But he went on to say, his work ethic is just unbelievable. And, you know, he was implying all this pressure that this young 18-year-old kid was putting on all these Lakers veteran players. You know, that was very unusual at that time, to have someone come in working that hard, that talented. At that time, the NBA wasn't making room for 18-year-old kids. It was a man's league. But Kobe wasn't just an 18-year-old. He was an 18-year-old who was making them look bad. And he was climbing the ladder, breaking line in the cafeteria, sort of as Rick Fox explained to me, who was a veteran on those Lakers. You know, Kobe turned pro because he had this deal with Adidas set up by Sonny Vaccaro that paid him millions. That had never happened. Even when Kevin Garnett, who was another one of those players I looked at for that paperback book, even when Kevin Garnett turned pro the year before out of high school, he had no kind of shoe deal to speak of. He had a shoe deal, but it was nothing. It paid him minimal money. Kobe got money, big money, to turn pro. And so when the Lakers made an early trip to Europe, there were today it's common to see in Los Angeles or other cities the side of a building with a big, tall portrait projected there of a star player. But the Lakers were astounded to see that of a young Kobe when they went to Europe. So anyway, Larry Drew was letting me in on this. And I had gotten to know Larry and I'm revisiting all of this now because I'm writing about the entire career of Magic Johnson. And I had been spending a lot of time with the Lakers in the early 90s, really studying Magic up close. And again, Larry Drew was a substitute in the early 90s. They had brought him in to back up Magic before, even as Magic's career was sort of going through that phase where his HIV infection had knocked him out of the league. And I had spent a lot of time, and so much of the good fortune for a journalist is having those sources. You know, there's sort of a truth speak that you don't get very often in a sports locker room. So much of what athletes and even coaches say is really sort of a pablum of cliches to feed the press and move the process along. But one of the things I found out in interviewing assistant coaches and often secondary figures, they are the owners of a truthful perspective. They can tell you things that they would not even say if they were standing in front of a TV camera, because they could be explosive.
Right.
At the time, in the fragile mental makeup of a team trying to get better. But if they're standing around, and I was not a very important figure, still am not in the NBA. I'm just some guy with a press pass, auxiliary writing books, doing stuff. So I really was non-threatening. You weren't going to see what you told me splashed across the headlines the next day. And so these conversations allowed me to sort of slowly learn and soak in all of the things that were sort of behind the scenes. I knew, for example, that general manager Jerry Krause and coach Phil Jackson of the Bulls were in a war long before that ever became public. That they had this great working relationship that had just fallen apart in a very bitter and ugly manner. And this was in 94 and 95 and would not become public until Michael returned and everything started to gain a new look. And even then, the depth of dislike that had developed between those two men, well, it really didn't become evident until 97, 98, that Last Dance season.
Okay, Mr. Lazenby, where were you? Where were you and what were you doing when you found out that Kobe passed?
I was sitting right in this chair in this room. This is where I write. It's a dining room. It drives my wife crazy. I do my interviews from here. I spend hours. I was up at 3:30 a.m. this morning working away, trying to finish. It's very important how you finish a book. I was working away, trying to, and I'm very close on the magic book, but I have to get it right.
Okay.
And so I was here, and first I got a quick phone call from my former son-in-law who had just heard it. And then I got a text from George Mumford, the great team psychologist, the guy that I had introduced to Kobe one night in Houston. And he became one of, besides Tex Winter, perhaps the most important figure in Kobe's life, because both Tex Winter and George Mumford, you know, Kobe was in a battle with Phil Jackson. And this was a battle of two people with very strong wills. And the protectors of Kobe, and that seems strange because you don't think of Kobe as needing protectors, but here's an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, then 21, 22, who's doing war with this guy who has all the power of history with him, Phil Jackson, and a guy who plays immense mind games, who can be so illuminating in the basketball process, but he can also be absolutely destructive for any opponent he encounters. And if Phil Jackson is determined to break your will, and Kobe Bryant is telling me when I talk to him, I'm not going to let them break me. It was a very, very behind the scenes, dramatic showdown that was not going to be resolved any given day. It just kept going. And George Mumford and Tex were the two guys who stepped up to protect Kobe from Phil Jackson. And Tex was the kind of guy who could say anything. And he, with the Bulls and later with the Lakers, there was just no one who was going to step up and tell the great Phil Jackson he was full of crap and acting like an ass. But Tex Winter could do that every day. He was there to, and he would tell me these things. He was there to take on, and this was a tremendous favor to Phil Jackson. He was taking on Phil's own distended ego. And of course, Kobe had his own distended ego as well. And it wasn't just the fact that he was 19, 20, 21, 22 in that era. It was the immense size of his ambition and his ego. You know, everybody says, oh yeah, we got to endeavor to be great. And it sounds wonderful until you get into it and what it really means. And I wrote an earlier book on Kobe about his early life called Mad Game, the NBA education of Kobe Bryant. And I described him then. I spent a lot of time with Kobe when he was young. And I described him then as balls to the wall. I mean, the ferocity of his intent. He could have ended up in a mental institution. I mean, who does those things? It's a Joan of Arc kind of thing. And I don't mean to minimize Joan of Arc. I mean, her bravery and ferocity in her circumstances is off the charts. But here, Kobe's going against everything. It's Kobe against the world, except that Tex Winter is sort of the Kobe whisperer, and George Mumford is right there. Now, Tex had, Phil made Tex pay. He demoted Tex. Tex and some of his associates with the Lakers called it de-benching him. He made Tex sit behind the bench. And, you know, Tex was an older guy, but he was brilliant. He hadn't lost a thing. But it was Phil's way of sort of getting back at him in this struggle. George Mumford was a guy who was there, had worked with Jordan and had really helped the Bulls. And that's why Phil brought him in. And, you know, George Mumford, as a psychologist, as a mindfulness expert, he was the one thing Shaq and Kobe could agree on. Shaq would tell me, he's our secret weapon. And he just had all the techniques for relieving all the pressure. And we're now in the middle of the NBA playoffs, and these guys are making far more today than they ever made back then. These guys have immense power, the players today. All of the things that used to restrain them are gone, and the teams are committing hundreds of millions of dollars to them. And so they face pressure. We see the players, when they play well, it's great. But when they can't find that zone, it becomes instant ridicule. And they're making so much money, maybe they don't care, but I submit that just about all of them care immensely. And so the pressure is immense. And George was the guy who could help them sort of swim through the pressure and perform well. And that's why Shaq and Kobe found immense value in George Mumford. But Phil's punishment of him was to discontinue his contract. He cut the wheels right out of the George Mumford operation. Now, they're close personal friends, just like Phil and Tex loved each other. But Phil, he was a one-voice guy. He wanted to be God Almighty on his teams, and he didn't say all that much to his players. But it was the world he created, and they only lived in it. Now, a guy like Michael could sort of be Zeus, but he was still living within much of that world. And so it was sort of a magical thing. But that is where, and in that time is when I got to know Kobe. I was rebounding free throws for him in the Forum after practice in 1999. He was practicing missing free throws, you know, where you're down and you need the ball and you got to bounce it off the front of the rim and get it. Kobe would spend hours doing things like practicing missing free throws for game situations.
Simulation.
And that's when he first told me, he said, I've always dreamed that Tex Winter would be my coach. And I said, you are kidding me. I almost fell on the floor. And so Kobe, of course, had studied tape of everything. And he was very frustrated because he didn't think the Lakers offense was very organized. And I don't have to really talk too much to media and fans in the Philippines about the triangle. Coach Cone is
Yes.
Now the game has basically outlawed the triangle. They've changed all the timeline and they've changed the reset clock, and they really made it impossible to run the triangle anymore. That was really a reaction to Phil Jackson in a lot of ways, but it was the desire of American pro basketball to make more money, and it has made them lots of money because scoring and tempo have jumped up, and so that all the mathematicians are now involved, and there's all the analytics, and it's really it's as I was explaining to in an interview on an Irish sports site, it would be like going into soccer and removing the goalie. And the reason you would do it is because there would be more points scored and the fans would get crazier. And of course, in soccer, it's so traditional, they would never allow it. And I remember when the NBA began making those changes in 2005, I wrote an article called The Death of Defense. And I wrote that largely with Tex Winter as he saw it, but we did not call it the death of the triangle because, we really only started to understand that through Coach Cone. And the global understanding of basketball, make no mistake, he's a very modest man, Coach Cone is, but he has really continued our understanding of the direction of the game and what's involved. He, through his efforts, has made himself obviously the foremost expert on the triangle today. I would say greater even than Phil Jackson, but just because of all of Coach Cone's efforts to learn it and then to deploy it so successfully. And so I'm not sure that worldwide recognition will ever come.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because the triangle, has been legislated out of existence. It's impossible to run it. You can't win now because the time is shaved down to where you don't have time to execute, as Coach Cone first explained to me. And so he won't get, Coach Cone won't get that credit, but it is as legit as anything I've seen in basketball, and I've been doing this a while.
Sir, I want to get your thoughts on a controversy that's slowly brewing between Nike and Kobe's widow Gianna and Kobe's estate over the release of a shoe or sneaker of Gianna without the permission of the Bryant estate and Mrs. Bryant. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you always try to approach things from a human standpoint. And so if you approach it there, it's immensely disrespectful. There is, of course, the business background.
Yeah.
And I wrote it in Showboat about first Kobe's relationship with Adidas and how that happened, how it made his career happen in a big way, and how he and Vanessa really became disenchanted with Adidas. And he made his big move, of course, which was facilitated in some part by his father, Joe, to Nike. But I will say this, it's disrespectful. I will also say this, there was a time when Vanessa was seen as young and disrespectful and unappreciative of the shoe industry. And she was that a bit. But I think that the long game, the long view on her has been right on. She's a very impressive woman. And just as Kobe went through, his youth in basketball had its ugly, ugly edges.
Yes.
And he had a lot of lessons to learn. But wow, what a man he was becoming, which is the real tragedy. I mean, yes, we lost a great basketball player, but studying that guy and being there through some of the the really brutal learning lesson, the lessons he learned, he was just becoming a real treasure. And that was difficult because he had that, you know, it's like Phil Jackson said of Michael, man, there's nothing like going into an arena with Michael Jordan on your team, knowing you're just going to scare the poop out of everybody. You're going to intimidate the whole building. And you're going to be able to walk out of there with a victory most nights. And it's not just going to be a victory. It's, you know, it's a statement. But then the next day on the team bus or somewhere, you got to live with that competitive nature. You know, and it's the competitive nature of these great competitors. They have their generous, kind human moments, but that's really not part of their competitive environment in that team. And the teammates love them for the winning, but it can be very hard, as Phil Jackson told me in one of my first interviews. It can be very hard to spend time with those great competitors. They are just unsparing. They have a power no one else has. It's almost like a rock band that has a really great star who is sort of dismissive of the other members of the band a lot of days. It's an interesting dynamic.
And what did you think of the Last Dance documentary?
I thought it was just so wonderful. And, you know, the director was so generous in making it public that my two books, Blood on the Horns, a much earlier book about the Last Dance season, and I did it right when it happened. And then Michael Jordan, The Life. My two books, he stated publicly were Bibles for him in creating that series. And it's amazing what he was able to do. The only criticism I have is that it really didn't connect the dots on Michael's abuse of Jerry Krause on the team bus during the '97 playoffs and the tremendous humiliation that he laid on the general manager of the team in front of the whole team. And and I reported it for Blood on the Horns. At the time, and it made everyone ultimately very uncomfortable to see that. But that's when Krause came back and said, I don't care if we go 82-0, because he viewed Phil as empowering Michael to do that. And it was the coming of player power. Today's players have more power than ever could have been imagined. And Magic and Michael were the guys first articulating that great power. Now, there's all kinds of debates over that. People want to get up in arms about it. But the players were powerless for a long time. And you had owners who were doing all kinds of things that were either stupid or petty. They were doing great things in some cases, but there were a lot of teams that were just bad, had bad ownership, bad leadership. And so, you know, in looking at it honestly, you could say, well, the players aren't doing any worse of a job than the owners did, perhaps back in the day. You know, I don't think it's been resolved yet. I'm not a huge fan of super teams, but that's sort of like going to an outdoor court on a Saturday morning, and whoever wins gets to stay up, and everybody else is on the sideline trying to fashion a team that can beat whoever wins. And so that's sort of a natural element of basketball. And so these guys have the power today, and we're seeing in the Brooklyn Nets, that's a hell of a pickup team. They've picked up the players and made that happen. And so I do think we'll come to the perspective at some point We will value teams on whether it's almost like the difference between organic and non-organic vegetables. We pay a higher price for organic, and we'll look back at teams like Showtime for the Lakers, at the Bulls, certainly at the Celtics, and we'll consider those organic basketball teams the age of organic basketball. And there'll be an age that's inorganic, where it's mostly the power of a select few. And I think LeBron James would be a power in any age. He would be remarkable in any age. He would be a remarkable human being in any age. But I think this inorganic age doesn't provide or give him due justice, because he has played on those, and I'm revealing some prejudices here, but he's played on those contrived teams. In Miami, I heard about that a year before it happened. Again, one of the assistant coaches,
Yes,
who saw it coming, told me, and I tweeted about it, and that's when people said, I'm some crazy old man. But it happened.
yes.
And so we've seen it happen. And Kevin Durant has hopped from one puddle of contrived teams to another. And he may be one of the greatest of all time, but he will always be in that category of the inorganic contrived teams. And so it's a little different when you're the guy and you don't have that all-time great point guard by your side, and you don't have 4 all-time players that you've put together. And that was Jordan's route. You could argue that when Magic Johnson came to the Lakers, he had the game's greatest center right there. But, Kareem had bottomed out in his career. The Lakers were not successful. There was a lot of ridicule for him because he had sort of a low temperature at that point in his career. And so that was an organic team. Magic came to it in the draft, and the wonderful idea of a chemistry creator like Magic coming to a team like that was something. You look at Bill Russell with the Celtics, he was a revolution. He changed, he was the revolution that changed basketball in his own way. And in many regards, a one-man revolution, except he happened to be paired with the great Bob Cousy. But again, that was an organic thing. And there was absolutely zero player power when those guys dominated basketball. They had no options. And so I don't know when basketball will come to this perspective. And I appreciate the opportunity today to articulate the great Bulls teams and all of the teams I've mentioned, Magic's team, the great Bill Russell. I've been able to articulate the tremendous perspective and experience brought by Tim Cone. I think that's an overlooked thing. And so there are certain things that at some point may come into clarity for basketball fans at large. But right now they're all sort of cheesing on all the scoring. Oh, it's the all-time this and it's the all-time that, but it's really an old trick in basketball. Eddie Gottlieb really pioneered it. He was the owner coach of the Philadelphia Warriors. And he had a new trick. He had this Kentucky hillbilly, Jumpin' Joe Fultz, the first real pusher of the jump shot. And Eddie Gottlieb just left him in the game to score and score and score. And back then they were lucky to get 5,000 people in the building to see a game. But Jumpin' Joe Fultz became the first 20 points per game scorer in the NBA in the 1940s. And Eddie Gottlieb was the kind of coach, he wasn't just thinking about the game, he was also the owner. So he's there before every game counting the house. he's looking at how many people have attended. Now, this is the embryonic stage of the business that is the NBA. And along comes Wilt Chamberlain as Eddie Gottlieb's territorial pick. And that fabulous 1962 season, Wilt sat on the bench for all of 4 minutes. The whole season. Played every minute. And that scoring and the assists and the rebounds, I mean, the guy could produce them in half the time. He was brilliant, but he was particularly brilliant at that time. And so those numbers, that is what excites fans. And basketball has been a tough sell, pro basketball in particular. It was played in the mining towns. It had all the big ropes around. That was the cage game. It was played in cages, these big rope cages. And the miners would heat up nails with a cigarette lighter and throw them on the court. And it was really a game in the northeastern part of the United States. And it had its appeal, but it really started to get some juice from the Globetrotters. They had trouble selling tickets to NBA games, and they wouldn't allow the Globetrotters in the league, but they would play double headers, and the Globetrotters would play first. And the fans would come out in droves to see that artistry and the humor and the magicianship and all the things that the Globetrotters could bring. And of course, the Globetrotters travel the world bringing that joy to fans. And there was enough of the Showboat to creep into the game. I'm sorry to go on about this, but it's amazing how all of this has led to where we are today. But the idea of scoring is simply NBA executives, the suits of American pro basketball, counting the house. They've got to have this continued sense. It's greater, and you're witnessing history, but history's not enough. It's got to be juiced up history. And that's where I sort of raised that question.
All right, Mr. Lazenby, I'll turn you over now to Brian, my co-host, who has questions for you.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you for those excellent questions, by the way.
You're welcome.
Yes, you mean. Well, Vince asked mostly on the books. I'll ask more on the players. I'm just curious, having had that opportunity to talk with these players up and close, were there anything that you left out? I mean, when you wrote those books, I'm sure there has to be something you left out.
Well, I have probably a 900-page manuscript on Magic Johnson. Things are going to have to be cut. It's going to have a haircut. I hope most of that is my verbosity. Sometimes there are things I had to cut about 40,000 words or six to 8 months of hard work out of the Magic Johnson manuscript, because I traced his family back to the 1830s, to slavery. And it's a remarkable family story. And I wrote 700 pages on Michael Jordan, a huge amount on the cultural story of America and his family. And I did the same with Jerry West when I wrote the biography on him for ESPN. I went back 400 years with Jerry West. It's a remarkable backstory. And those things were appreciated by a large number of readers. There are always those who say, wait a minute, I just want the hoops. I don't want to understand the cultural story. But I treat these competitors almost like American presidents. When they do a biography of an American president, it'll go 600 pages, because they're dealing with this guy who, orders the armies around, or, it does whatever he does and sets policy for the globe. And of course, there's nothing more important than that. But the rise of these great competitors, they are global figures. Now, a lot of what they do is metaphorical. Well, you know, we're excited for the human element, for what they show us about ourselves, what their competitive nature shows us about ourselves. But I think I'm writing culturally a lot of times to what I first thought was just an American audience about race, because I think race matters so much. It has been used and misused to horrific extent in culture all over the world. And I used to think this was an American story, but I do a lot of, my Jordan book, for example, even though it is 700 pages, has been translated into, I think, 20 languages. And so I am doing interviews. Now, in the Philippines, that's still the standard English, but in Italy, in Poland, all over the world, when I do these interviews, I've noticed after 2020, there's an increased racial consciousness, particularly when for example, I was being interviewed in a Polish broadcast, and the interviewer was very conscious of Black Lives Matter and had an awareness and really was treating it as a moral value. And I think that the ugliness of racism is that after all of the eons of human existence, we have never established it as a moral value. And I think it is a supreme moral value. And, you know, prejudice doesn't have to be race. It can be religion or whatever. But somewhere in there, I think human progress, and I'm sorry to get off track, but that's the guy I am. But I think basketball is a sport that has played a role in this very important idea that racism or anti-racism is a vital moral value to all humans. And so it's sort of the story of that. And American basketball is really the rise of a powerless people, of a people who weren't just powerless, of people who were, I quoted it the other day, American racism is like cutting a man's legs off in his youth and then belittling him his entire life because he can't walk. And so I think one of the hopes for humanity is the end of racism and the establishment of anti-racism as a moral value for as many people as we can get. And I think basketball and great competitors and their stories, it's sort of, in their own way, these great competitors, particularly now that they are marketing shoes and clothing, and they dominate global media. They are important figures culturally. And so with the Magic book, it was almost too much. And so the manuscript's 900 pages, and this is a long answer, but that was a complicated question you asked. And so I've had to cut 40. Now that's, like I said, I was up at 3:30 this morning. That's 6 months of hard investigative work. I'm not kidding, 7 days a week. And to cut that out, and it was an amazing story. And I'm hoping I can include some of it as an index, but we'll just have to see. The kinds of things tend to be like that. Now, the lawyers always go over a manuscript. And it's not that you are writing something that is untruthful. It's that you are writing something for which someone can sue you. You know, we had a president who once sued one of the publishing companies I work for over, they were saying that this president lied about his wealth, that he was constant, and he's being investigated for that right now because he used that to avoid taxes or whatever. I don't know if it's true, but I know that he sued the publisher. The publisher fought that suit, spent $25 million fighting the suit of Donald Trump, and the publisher won, but it lost the 25 million it spent. And so when lawyers review manuscripts, and you're writing biography, they're going to review everything thoroughly. And so they don't have to say, oh, we're flagging this because this is untruthful. What they're looking for, we're flagging this because we could get sued over it, and so we're not going to include this. And so, for example, it was public knowledge, it had been stated in newspapers that Kobe Bryant's parents had objected to his marrying Vanessa because she wasn't of his race. Now, that's been reported far and wide, but never have I heard the Bryants stand up and tell the public that's why they opposed it. And so even though it may have been in the LA Times, or the lawyer said, oh no, that's not going to be in the book, because they could sue us and we'd have to spend a lot of money. And so that's just the reality of publishing. And so occasionally there are things like that. I'm writing a book about a sex addict right now. Fortunately, he has made a lot of statements on the record about his sex life. He ended up HIV positive. I can say my book is about, I've been a high school coach. I've done a lot of things in my life. I was a varsity head coach at age 23, in high school in America. And so I've seen a lot of impressive kids in all of my work and in all the interviews I've done, and just in all of my analysis of his youth. I've never encountered a more impressive 15-year-old kid than Irvin Magic Johnson. Unbelievable in his impact on the community, his willingness to do this and that. The mojo he brought to Los Angeles was the mojo he visited on Lansing as a teenager. And so you can imagine the great transformation that goes from a very talented and magnetic human being who ends up in a place like Los Angeles and ends up sex addicted to the point that he ends up HIV positive. And then, of course, the story is about his response. But so there's going to be a very thorough legal review of what I'm doing on this book. But that's fine. I sort of understand the landscape when I write a biography, and I've been through these enough where there are certain ways to tell the truth. A lot of times a biography puts everything in order, in time, chronologically, and just putting things in the right order explains so much to the reader about a life and about how things happen. And so it's not just what you say in a thing, it's getting it all in order and putting it in the right context. And that's what a 600-page, 700-page book does. It allows all this context we can't get in other places.
But of all of those that you've written, which is the hardest for you?
Well, I'm 68. And when I was writing in my 50s, I would get, I guess the Kobe book, just because they put me on a 1-year deadline. Actually, it was a 10-month deadline. It was insane. I broke my health down because I was coming right off the Jordan book. And the day I finished it, my sister died. I hadn't been able to visit with her. I was angry. There were a lot of things that happened in the publishing of that book that I was so angry. It just, I'll never have, and I've written a lot of books. And later in my career, I started writing biographies, and that's a very different animal than doing a book on the 1987-88 season with pictures of the Boston Celtics. That's where I learned to write, doing those kinds of books. And then I learned to write biography. But Showboat was very tough.
I see. All right, Vince, back to you first.
Okay, Mr. Lazenby, Michael was out of the league for 2 years, and as you know, the Rockets went back to back, and I think Michael has always said that they would really, had they faced the Rockets in one or both those years, that Hakeem was always a problem for them. Now, had Michael played in both years, would we have seen an 8-peat?
No. First of all, and I won't, I try not to presume too much. People ask me to compare players, like Michael's number one, LeBron's number two. I don't do any of that. I'm a writer, and I really study the competitors. But come on, I'm going to come in and pick who's 1 and 2 or who's number 8. That's ridiculous. I'm some guy, at best, I'm some guy sitting on the sideline, or I'm here years later in my chair. Come on, whatever they do stands for itself. And in some regards, that extends to the teams too. I'm going to say, and I've had to write a book that I picked, a certain team number 1 and another one number 2, and it's ridiculous. But if we had a time machine, we could answer it all. It would still be problematic. But the circumstances, Jordan was severely depleted after the three-peat. All of the human elements were exhausted by that three-peat. The Bulls had lost Horace Grant. A lot of people think, so what? Michael was further limited because he went to baseball and went to a baseball body and had to rebuild a basketball body, but that wouldn't have mattered against the Rockets. The Rockets were rising. Magic, for the most part, had abused a younger Hakeem, yes, and a younger Ralph Sampson. And that Rockets team, though, had fought through all those battles with the Showtime Lakers, and had finally added the elements. They were coming into their own. However, you'd have to play it out. But I don't bet on sports other than my life. When I say that, I mean, I spend years writing about something. I'm obviously investing a lot of time in a sport, it's almost a gamble in a sense. But the mojo, I think that at least one of those championships could well have been won by Houston, maybe both.
Yes.
But I wouldn't I wouldn't venture to say that. I think that's disrespectful of the two championships they won. And I think that you have to you have to extend respect to them for winning those two.
Okay. If well, if you notice this season and maybe a bit of last season, scores have increased. Points on the board have increased exponentially, significantly. Don't you miss the days where um, hand checking was still allowed, or Michael's time, Magic's time, where hand checking was still allowed, and they say that um, during those times the league was a real man's league as compared to today's NBA.
Well, Tex Winter's point, and he's far smarter than I ever was when the NBA began changing these rules for 2005, 2006, is that they allowed no hand checking. That's why we see all the layups today.
Yes.
In the old NBA, they'd put you on your ass. None of that. You see free flow for the guards. But Texas' complaint from the very first moment they did it was they're still allowing the post players to get hammered. And so what they have done is remove the big man from the games. Wilt Chamberlain was maybe the greatest. It's hard to evaluate. He certainly was prodigious. He's one of the greatest. And he didn't sell a lot of tickets. As Franklin Muley of the Warriors in San Francisco said, the public doesn't love Wilt. They don't line up to go see him. They love, now he sold some tickets with the Philadelphia Warriors, obviously. But I think they love seeing shorter players, the underdog, do things. And, you'll see a guy like Steph Curry light it up from distance. And this is supposedly the great vindication for the little guy. And Steph is 6'3". That's no little guy. We're dealing with freakish athletes across the globe. But, American basketball was usually all about, and my father was a very fine player in the 30s. He wasn't he was a semi-pro, industrial league kind of player. But the whole game then was 5'11" guys taking these series of one-handed dribbles and launching up two-handed set shots from downtown. And tall people weren't in the game. They were called goons. They were freaks of nature, and there was a prejudice. And George Mikan and the great, it escapes me now, there's another early great big man. They were 6'10", and they were goons. They were freaks. And people just thought they were, and Mikan took the Lakers to 6 championships, 1 in the old National League and 5 in the NBA. And so he was something of a draw.
Yes.
But there was a prejudice there against big guys. Now, are they prejudiced today? No, they've made them step out to the perimeter and shoot threes and roll to the basket. We see a lot of absurd and ugly moments in games, usually not when Steph's on the floor. And the kid, obviously, down in Atlanta is showing us the same kind of fascinating moxie. That sells tickets, that gets TV ratings, that drives the cash registers of basketball because it is a business. But they've stilted the game away from the power of the big man. And they've done it artificially. They've stilted the game. What the triangle simply did was control tempo. Now, it didn't mean it was they weren't running the 4 corners. They weren't running the stall game. but they controlled tempo. Tex Winter used to tell me all the time when he would beat all the guys who had running teams. And the Bulls would have a control break. They would run off their defense sometimes. But Tex would always tell me, you can hurry to a butt whipping. And so people trying to get the running game up and going could hurry to a butt whipping. But the Celtics and the Showtime Lakers, the Celtics of Bill Russell, and of course Magic Johnson and other teams had brought this great running tradition to basketball. The running the Showtime Lakers did for all the fabulous, beautiful, fast breaks that Magic Johnson orchestrated, they weren't putting up points like these teams are today. But in fact, the teams of today aren't as efficient as a lot of those teams back in the day before the game was juiced up. I can't read the future in that regard. If I had to bet, I would say the NBA is making so much money. There are millions and millions of fans invested in high scoring. They think they are seeing something that's never been done before. And they are, but they're seeing it because the game has been stilted to make it run that way. Now, it's still impressive they can run up and down the floor and make those shots. That is the salvation of the game in the 21st century. But it's not the game that was played in the 20th century. And I was talking with the Irishman I was on with. They have a huge platform there, Off the Ball Sports. And I was saying, could you imagine association football, or soccer as we call it in the United States? Could you imagine them taking a radical move, like getting rid of the goalies so that scoring would increase, and that would, well, first of all, soccer is it's the number one sport in popularity around the globe. So they don't need to do that. But could you imagine the tradition of soccer allowing such a move? And I think that, basically American basketball, which has become global basketball, the ownership of it, and it was originally Canadian basketball, was invented by a Canadian. But American basketball is a relatively young sport. When my father played it in the 30s, they had a center jump after every basket. Think about that. If you score a basket, the refs blow a whistle, and you go to the center of the court and you jump the ball.
Yeah, every score.
And so it is a young sport, relatively speaking. And so I don't want to sit here and argue against the evolution of business, the evolution of the sport. I just want to point it out so that people are aware of it. And I think people are perfectly capable, fans and players and coaches and officials are perfectly aware of what has happened and are able to form their own value judgments on it. There are things about today's game that are gorgeous. There are moments that are gorgeous, many of them. And there are many other moments that are butt ugly. But I must say, you could say that in the 80s and the 90s. You could say that in every decade. So I have a tendency to harp on it. But I think fans are always learning. And I know that's been the case in my lifetime. We don't know everything all at once. We eat it a bite at a time. And so it'll be interesting to see if basketball, for example, keeps all of its emphasis. If it had hand checks, if it reinstated hand checks and bumping the cutter, they might shoot 3-pointers all the time. How ugly would that be? And so I don't know the answer. I do know the answer is not allowing the big men to get fouled as much. I think at least that ought to change. You ought to quit allowing all the physical contact in the post. If you're going to do it for the guards, you need to do it for the bigs.
well, you're friends with Michael and Magic, and we all know what happened with
Oh no,
Ice.
I'm not friends. Michael's angry with me. I mean, Michael has
Okay,
been very generous with me.
okay,
But when you write a biography of someone, it's sort of like performing an autopsy while they're still living. And my wife even tells me, "Can't you write about someone who's deceased?" And Michael has been very generous with me, even after the book came out. He shook my hand. I don't want to say that he's been petty in any way. And Magic had agreed to work with me, and then he changed his mind, but mainly because of a documentary deal that he was offered. And that's fine. I'm a biographer. I'm trying to write an independent look at their lives. I don't know a major rock star or any other figure or any business that doesn't try to control its own narrative. So I'm not the kind of guy they're going to hang out with. Now, they have been friendly with me, yes. I just need to make that difference. I'm not trying to claim I'm this ultimate hooked up insider.
okay. Let me rephrase my question. What do you know about Isaiah's exclusion from the Dream Team?
Mostly what my research tells me, and I travel with the bad boys.
Yes.
I did their books, their team books for 5 years during all the championships. Very close with Joe Dumars, and Joe was very close with Michael. Excuse me.
Yes.
I know there was a lot of hard feelings, and so some of it was misunderstanding. And in my Magic book, it's very complicated. I'll just say part of it was misunderstanding. Part of it was the tough, gritty nature of Isaiah. Part of it was personal resentments. Part of it was friendship gone bad. You know, uh, Chuck Daly was the coach of the Dream Team.
Yes.
Isaiah was his guy. They had a journey together to defeat the Celtics and then defeat the Lakers. It doesn't get any more real for a pro player to, first of all, eventually vanquish that great Boston Celtics team, and then to really the '88 series went to 7 games. It all hinged on a foul call against Bill Laimbeer that allowed it to go to 7 games. And then an ankle injury to Isaiah Thomas that he fought off valiantly. But so these are proud men. Isaiah and Magic had a friendship. They had the same agent. It was a very different experience. But they came apart competing. And then Magic's HIV infection was like letting off a bomb in the NBA. And so there were fragments of that explosion everywhere. And the Dream Team was one of them. And it also involved the '85 All-Star game and all the misunderstanding that came out of that. And that's just competitors. There were a lot of hard feelings. And Isaiah bore responsibility for some of that. Some of that he didn't. But they are human. They are capable of being quite petty, just as they're capable of being quite competitive. They could have had that dream team with Isaiah. They wouldn't have had it with Michael. And if it became known, they might not have had it with Magic. But I think Magic was in such a situation he wanted to play so badly. In reality, would they have missed Michael? They won those games in blowouts. For years, I didn't really get the meaning and value of the dream team. I thought it was a charade. You take these top players in the world and then you smear all the other countries. And you're allowing American professionals. It was such an overkill. I really tended to view it all as hype. I understand now what a legendary moment it was for global basketball. It was also a legendary moment, as I write, for NBA branding as the heart and soul of global basketball. And I think that's well and good. That's fine. It's a good American business. You guys do a pretty fair business in the Philippines of basketball yourselves.
Yes.
And so I'm not, I'm just looking at it face value. I'm not trying to say, but it was a big moment, and it allowed many good things to happen. It really, exploded the business of basketball in the global mind. And so if we had all these blowouts and it wasn't a fair competition, maybe that's a small price to pay for accelerating the growth of the game. Because I think it's, even without the rules of yesterday, it's a wonderful game. It allows me to have conversations like I'm having today, all over the world. And basketball is a very hopeful thing. And so is soccer or association football. They are both tremendously hopeful. I think, from my limited perspective of being an American basketball is really powerful because of the racial context in which it emerged. It's hard to overstate the character assassination that had been leveled. And it wasn't just character assassination. That was just in addition to all the other forms of assassination that had been leveled against African-American males for centuries in this country. And it was one of those areas where freedom began to break through. Now we're in an age where that's starting to happen in a big way in every human endeavor. But America was so systematically evil in its approach to race. I tend to value that personally. I don't have a strong global perspective. That's why I add all of this to what's being said on an international broadcast such as this, because every country has those kinds of systematic prejudices, whether they're religious or ethnic. That's part of the human animal, and it's an ugly, ugly part of the human animal. And when it's overcome, it's a beautiful thing. And basketball is a beautiful thing.
Mr. Lazenby, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if you're still teaching or you taught at Virginia Tech.
I'm not any longer. I started writing these long books. I taught at Radford University for 10 years and Virginia Tech for 11. And you learn so much from your students. It was a wonderful time. And I had a teaching schedule of 2 or 3 days a week, which allowed me to travel and do my NBA work. And so it was wonderful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just explaining quickly.
It's all right. I was going to ask you, did you get to watch ACC games? And I want to get what your thoughts on Coach Roy Williams' retirement and the impending retirement of Coach K after this coming season.
It's obviously historic. I started out writing about the ACC. My first book was a book on Ralph Sampson. It was my master's thesis turned into a book. And I worked with Billy Packer, who was the ACC guy, on a succession. We did 5 books together later, back in the 80s mostly. The last one in 1998. It's just a huge part of the culture of American basketball. And there are people who have been considered practitioners of the moral and correct way to coach. American basketball has been plagued by corruption forever. Some would argue that college basketball, some have argued that it in itself is morally corrupt. You know, it's trading education to young disadvantaged men for this business worth billions for their efforts. And so that's a philosophical debate. In that context, I can't think of anyone who's done it better than Coach K or Roy Williams. And Roy Williams is an extension of Dean Smith, of that whole mindset. And of course, that's Dean Smith is connected to my buddy Tex Winter, because Dean Smith's longtime assistant who succeeded him, I'm sorry, I'm having a senior moment.
Coaching tree. It's a term you came up with. Coaching
right.
tree.
Tex Winter's point guard and assistant coach at Kansas State, Coach, and you'll have to forgive me.
It's okay.
But anyway, that was the heart of Dean Smith's. You know, Dean Smith didn't run the triangle, but he ran a very tight form of system basketball. Once again, controlling all kinds of elements. And so this is the end of an era. And Coach K was amazing because he made all of the transitions of those eras, even to, you know, and Duke was, you know, has this image as an academically driven institution that won basketball games, but, you know, basketball evolved for amateurs into the age of one and done. And to see Coach K make that transition, you know, and he looks like a young man. He's an old fart. He's an old guy, you know, and he has been ageless. He's ageless in his retirement. I'm 68. I'm 6 years younger. If they had me up there doing that press conference, I'd look like everybody's great uncle up there. You know, I'm worn out and barely making it to the finish line here on this Magic Johnson book. And to look at Coach K and all that he's done, he's a locomotive. And Roy Williams, he made that same grand push. And so, ACC basketball is near and dear. But no, once I began traveling for the NBA, I couldn't do it all. And, you know, it's kind of awkward. Once Virginia Tech joined the ACC while I was there, it would have been extremely awkward to be an instructor at a school and then writing publicly about the competition. And so it's pretty easy. The NBA to me was always great fun. When I got involved, you know, there just weren't that many people paying attention. A guy like me could walk in and start covering it. And locker rooms were open. There wasn't a lot of, I mean, there were media there, but it wasn't like the fist fight that it is today. You know, you go to the All-Star game, man, I used to be able to sit and talk with people, visit with everybody. I don't know how many media they have now. The pandemic changed that, of course, but before the pandemic, you know, starting in the early 90s, you'd have 1,000, 1,500 global media there. They grew the game. You know, it was a again, I hate to go back to the suits, but David Stern came in. I remember the moment. And they began dumping games in Europe. I remember meeting with a European broadcaster who came over to the All-Star game from Romania. They couldn't afford to put on soccer to broadcast local soccer in Romania, but NBA games were so cheap. They could broadcast NBA games regularly. And this was behind the Iron Curtain then. And they were smuggling around videotape of the NBA All-Star game in Romania. And they had these games on TV. On television, it was the height of American influence. And they were selling the NBA as Mount Olympus and all these players and coaches as Zeus. You know, it was a big thing in the global mind. And along comes Jordan. And, you know, there's Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. And they've got these figures. These guys can really play. They are amazing. And it just grows this entertainment business of American basketball. Before that, who cared about American pro basketball? It was the passion of a Michael Jordan and a Magic Johnson and a Larry Bird that made people care. And you know, Naismith invented basketball, you know, in 1891. Within 6 weeks, and he invented it at the School for Christian Workers in Massachusetts, where they were training YMCA secretaries. Within 6 weeks of his graduation, they were playing basketball in China because these YMCA secretaries graduated. So it was just this global network that grew for, you know, and it grew in different ways. I cannot overemphasize the great pride that fans in the Philippines should take for their own basketball culture. It shouldn't take a backseat anywhere to any. And that really will become part of, I think, the increased global understanding of things. That each of these basketball cultures that has grown up is an impressive thing in its own right. Just as I wouldn't try to compare who are the top 5 players. You know, who am I to say what's number 5? I view the idea of these basketball cultures the same way. There are, you know, a lot of the ideas for American basketball came from American coaches going down and coaching in Puerto Rico or going over and coaching in the Philippines. And they were getting ideas about the game. This is not an America down process. These are all laboratories for the game. Nobody has an edge. Now, there's an edge because the NBA has become this collection point for the global talent. But we're just starting to scratch the surface on global talent in terms of athletes and coaches. And who knows where it goes. I'm excited for that part of it.
All right, Brian?
Okay, so, well, me, I was doing a little searching with, I'm sure that you had your share of critique on The Last Dance. What were the things that you saw that were maybe inconsistent, or did you have any comments on that?
Well, I think it's tremendously challenging because basically The Last Dance is a biography of Michael Jordan. And to leave out Ron Harper,
Mm-hmm.
and really not emphasize his story. I mean, we saw when Ron, he was the whole heart of their pressure defense. And when he went out, and I'm thinking the 97 series, he had some tendonitis. And that's a different team without him. And so, you know, Ron stutters. He's a great player. I think they missed an opportunity for a very dramatic story there. The problem was they had an abundance of riches in terms of drama with the whole Jordan story, but just the honest truth of those players, of their personal stories. You know, and Steve Kerr has been very important to my work because he's a great source. His story is very dramatic. Scottie Pippen's story is very dramatic. Maybe Scottie didn't get, I mean, he got a lot, but the more you give him, the better in terms of he and Ron Harper took all this pressure off of Jordan. And I think you probably could have shown that in terms of first show the pressure on Jordan to deliver everything. And I did. I think that series showed, but the amount of pressure and how dependable they were in taking that pressure off of him. Now, Scottie Pippen had to grow to that. Ron Harper was this player who had been the guy. He had been a Jordan-like player and had suffered a devastating knee injury. And he came back and made himself not only a role player that saved the Bulls, but a role player that saved the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. And Ron Harper, you know, this is the age of media. You may not get a clean soundbite, but there's a line from a movie that I like where it says he speaks Bibles of truth. You could always count on Ron Harper to speak Bibles of truth. And so there are things like that there was just so much drama. You know, in some ways, the Jordan story, he's the stern taskmaster of American basketball, very demanding and ruthless in his approach, unapologetic for that. At the same time, the great Oz of American basketball, selling all the products, the Hanes underwear, the Gatorade, the shoes. He's sort of an Oz figure, and you know, behind the curtain, you've got this real Jordan there. He's this bloodthirsty guy. But you have these Europeans. Tony Kukoc had to swim a river of shit. Literally, there's no other way to state it. To be the incredible player he was. He was already well established. It's just the reality of it. And they showed that Last Dance. You got a sense of that. There were so many of these underlying stories that, you know, the Last Dance is sort of like the Dream Team. I said Jordan had perfect timing. He told me that. I was sitting with Michael up in the pre-draft camp in the rafters in 2008 in a one-on-one that he'd given me. And he was generous that way with me. And he was talking about his own life. We'd talked a lot about Kobe. And Michael told me something, a sort of an eternal lesson that I've used. He told me timing is everything. And he had this perfect timing to his career. He came along when David Stern had begun dumping all these games and people could see him all over the globe. They weren't having to pay very much to broadcast those games in Romania. It allowed them to have fascinating TV programming cheap. So it was it was something these countries welcomed. Don't get me wrong, and it was spectacular. And but the Last Dance, Michael, that footage is shot during the 97-98 season. I'm there all while they're shooting it. I'm interviewing and working and putting together Blood on the Horns, my book, on all this conflict going on. And Andy Thompson, Klay Thompson's uncle, is the field director shooting all of this beautiful footage. He's behind the scenes. He's getting the whole Jordan story with an NBA TV film crew, NBA Productions. And that footage sits there almost 20 years. Jordan won't agree to have it released. And Andy, and Andy has done a brilliant job. He's hardly mentioned in The Last Dance. And so it was fascinating to watch those guys move in and around all this conflict and shoot the footage. I mean, just doing that with everybody hating on each other at that time was amazing. And yet Jordan wouldn't release it. And it showed him in all his greatness. And suddenly, I think about 2018, they arranged the deal. 2019, he got $20 million. The money didn't matter. Jordan was a billionaire by then. But he finally agreed. And so here we are in the global pandemic. Everybody's sheltering in place, especially in the early months of the pandemic. Everybody is scared to death, literally, about getting sick with this mysterious infection. So all we have, basketball itself has shut down. All we have to watch is The Last Dance. Think about that. Think about Jordan's perfect timing. He had no idea of the pandemic when he finally agreed to allow that to go forward. And it has set the agenda in terms of media. It's like a second dream team. It has set the global agenda. I have been doing podcast interviews from all over the globe as a result of it. These wonderful conversations about basketball and what's important about it and what isn't. It's just a game we can play for free any day of the week. Well, I can't anymore. My knees are gone. But it's a gift for everybody. And I would suggest folks in Philippines take as much advantage of that as any culture. It certainly is as big as the culture in Brooklyn. Am I wrong? It's loved in the Philippines, is it not?
It is.
It's like a religion here.
Yep.
Right. Well, it is a religion. It was formed by a man of God.
Yeah.
It was formed at a school for Christian workers. The thing I like is that it's not a Christian game. It is a game of all religions. We have people practicing of every religion. And that's so vitally important because if racial intolerance is one thing, so is religious intolerance. And so it's become, and soccer feels the same thing. Basketball is a little different. It's that 5-man game, but both are important in that they're all about sharing and sharing the ball. The one thing I don't like, it's not universally true about the new game, the 21st century basketball. It's not entirely about sharing. It's about a lot of the selfishness of these preordained players who are these great one-on-one players that, and so that creates some issues for me. But the point that I'm making originally is that Jordan's timing is the timing for all of us. It's a global timing. in terms of learning about and appreciating the game and really using that as a platform for the globals, the celebration of global basketball.
Okay, let me move to the Lakers. What's your take on the Shaq Kobe feud? I've been hearing two versions.
I was there for all of it. I was there before Phil Jackson arrived for 3 years. Tex Winter used to pick my brain over how to deal with it. Not that there was much picking to be had in my brain, but it was real. It was understandable. You know, you had Shaq, this talented young giant, a very fun-loving guy, immature in a lot of ways, who had become the next great savior of LA. LA, the place of the great centers, from dating all the way back to George Mikan. And I say LA, but the Laker franchise in Minneapolis. And so its success, Wilt Chamberlain, they'd gotten a title, and then Kareem with Magic for Showtime. And so here comes Shaq, and they have this young, talented guy. It was an immense, you think the head-on collision with Shaq was, with Phil Jackson was something. You think that was something. Think about this. Phil Jackson basically was as organized and possessed of the clear mind as any coach I'd ever seen. And he had a hierarchy for his teams. And a lot of coaches would hide this hierarchy, and it would create cynicism. But Phil made no bones about it. Michael Jordan was number one on the Bulls. Everybody else fell in line behind. And that was clear from the very first minute. And he would look you in the eye in a team meeting and say, "You're number 7." Or maybe not specifically that way, but he would deliver that message, and everybody on the team knew his place. Mm-hmm. Now, there were people who were discontented, but they knew. And there was not a lot of, and so here's Kobe. He's an 18-year-old kid who's not afraid to call his shots. He's going to be the greatest. He's the one who's been given the shoe contract before he's ever played an NBA minute. I mean, he's a millionaire just off potential. And he not only has the big dreams, he has the cojones to call the big dreams and look anybody in the eye, you know. And here comes Kobe. I did a talk once at a school. I was speaking to high school kids here in America, in Virginia, where I live. And they were asking me to explain Kobe to them. And I said, well, and these are high school seniors, 17, 18. And there was this young woman sitting on the front row who asked the question. And I said, okay, what do you do? Do you work? And she said, yeah, I work at a grocery store. I said, well, tomorrow when you go in that grocery store, you walk in and you tell everybody that you're not just going to be running the grocery store in 5 years. You're going to be running the entire chain of grocery stores. You're going to be the top boss of them all. And so as an 18-year-old, you're going to tell everybody, not only are they working 8-hour days, but they need to spend 2 hours every day after work working on their cash register skills and practicing restocking and doing all these things to be the greatest grocery worker of all time. And not only are you telling them to do that, you're doing it yourself. And you'll come into work every day and they'll be stocking the shelves, and you'll take all that away from them and stock it twice as fast as they can. And you'll run the cash register much faster. And you're 18 years old and they are 33-year-old workers with families trying to get through working at a grocery store. I said, if we were all like Kobe, we'd be living in condos on the moon by now. But Kobe was this singular figure. And so that is a head-on collision, not only with Phil Jackson, but with Shaquille O'Neal. And Phil was a man of iron will. Kobe bent his will, and that collision dented Kobe's will a bit. But that was just the reality of it. And now here's the other thing: they call it a clubhouse for a reason when you're dealing with a sports team. And the Lakers locker room was a clubhouse like any other. And who was the big joyful Mickey Mouse running the thing? Here's Shaquille O'Neal. He's the popular guy. They love him. He's the meal ticket for everybody there. Here comes Kobe, this 18-year-old kid, presumptuous as hell. And Shaq's not above belittling him. And, that's how you take any veteran guy on a job and you have some rookie come in acting like a fool. And let's face it, declaring that you're going to be the greatest of all time is the height of foolishness. And so any veteran on any job is going to begin belittling and making fun of. And that's the road that all rookies face. But in Kobe's case, it was titanic. And it became hatred. And that's not my opinion. That's what Tex Winter told me. And he was the guy in between them. He was Kobe's defender against Shaq and Phil. And so this is not some speculation on my part. Introducing introducing Tex to Kobe and getting them started. And this was before Tex was ever hired by the Lakers, but getting them talking. Kobe was a kid in need of help at 19. 2 years later in 99, when I was rebounding those free throws for him, and the Lakers were getting swept by the Spurs in the first round. And he was as discouraged. He would tell me, I don't know how I'm going to make it. They keep trying to break me. I don't know how I'm going to make it, how I'm going to be the greatest, but I'm going to get there. I'm not going to let them break me. And so all of this force between the big center and the great coach were coming to bear on him. And they had been to bear on him with Del Harris too, coaching him, trying to, Del Harris was a kindly old ministerial guy trying to coax Kobe along, and it would get ugly. And he really didn't have a gear for dealing with that ugliness. And Phil had that kind of cunning and kind of off-putting way. He kept all his players off balance, Shaq and Kobe included. And so Phil could deal with those guys because he was played so many mind games. And so yes, that was all true. That was the environment. It couldn't have happened any other way. It couldn't have happened any sooner, probably, than them winning in Kobe and Shaq's fourth season together. And even that was a miracle that required Brian Shaw going off in Game 7 against Portland in that 2000 playoffs. And so it's an amazing story. It's a great basketball story. And it's an object lesson. That's why people are paying Phil Jackson or George Mumford or these folks lots and lots of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes, business executives to come in and talk about these things, because these are titanic collisions of human will.
I see. Okay, let me fast forward to today. Still the Lakers. I know Lakers fans are really in mourning right now because they got eliminated. What do you see is going to happen to the Lakers moving into the offseason?
Well, they're not getting any younger.
Mm-hmm. True.
But the skills that LeBron has built in putting together super teams will be tested once again. who will they be able to pull in? Who's going to sacrifice? Is LeBron the Tom Brady of basketball? Is he going to find a way to be the centerpiece, the quarterback, as Tom Brady is in American football? Is a lot of this is going to come down to LeBron's great skill in doing that. And what players are out there who want to gain the glory of being the LeBron rescuer, the LeBron savior? And, you know, they're already speculating. Are you? And we don't know. They're all in some ways trying out for the role. Is it going to be Damon Stoudemire, Luka Doncic? Which of these guys is going to become the figure who wants to do what Kevin Durant did and gains championship status by jumping ship? There may not be anyone, but LeBron has those skills. The circumstances are ripe. I think Anthony Davis is certainly young enough to continue to be the major player. It'll be interesting. And will LeBron finally fall off enough where it doesn't matter? I don't know. I think he could continue. He has enough of the playmaking ability in his game to, I'm sorry, something's popping up on my screen here, but he has the playmaking component of his game where he could make that transition. I wouldn't declare it gone. It'll be interesting. He also, the other factor is he has tremendous character. But, you know, time's undefeated, as NBA players all say, as players in every sport, time is undefeated. So, but the timing of each of these great competitors is something interesting to witness.
So, any chance are you going to do a biography of LeBron James?
Well, I'm on a 2-book deal.
Oh. Okay.
And the second is tentatively to do a LeBron biography. I don't think I have the gas in the tank. And you know, I don't know LeBron like I was able, I didn't have I could write a biography on him. And I could, and I understand. I've really done a lot of prep work. I've been day drinking with his uncle in Akron, so I know the deep background on the story. Wright Thompson did an amazing piece. The great Sports Illustrated, I forget who he's with now, ESPN. The great ESPN writer did the in-depth story, and it never was published on LeBron. And that goes back to the earlier part of this discussion. I don't think you can tell the full LeBron story because of legalities. And it's not that LeBron has anything to sue over, but there are private citizens around him who are a major part of the story. And to really tell his biography, you would need to tell the story of those private citizens. And I think that is complicated and will not happen. And so I don't want to do another biography. I wouldn't mind doing a basketball memoir, sort of like I could take some of this conversation and transcribe it, and deal with a lot of the themes that I just talked about with you guys here today. In fact, I apologize for such long answers and taking so long. My wife, who has to endure these things, we've been married 46 years this week. And so she finally waved at me, bye-bye. That's when I looked off. She has heard me blather on and on and on about this stuff. And there's literally no place for her to hide when it gets going. And so It's
Believe
tough.
believe me, we appreciate the long answers.
Well, I apologize, but you can see how I end up writing
Yeah.
600 and 700 page books because I think these are complicated things
Yeah.
and they need a lot of context and nuance, and all of it matters because it's all part of the human drama, and humans are complicated.
How about a Kobe Bryant, second Kobe Bryant book? I mean,
It would be
he
a
is the,
third.
yeah.
It would be a third one. There are Kobe Bryant books being printed now.
Mhm.
That jarring emotional moment for such a figure, people will be writing Kobe Bryant books forever. And I'm going to let Kobe rest in peace. I've had my say. I have treasures. My memoir will deal with that if I do a memoir. You know, that in itself is ridiculous. I am not I fall in the category of who gives a hoot. The only way I would have a memoir that anyone would read is that it would involve my interaction and my memories and my strategies for being some Virginia hillbilly, a nobody in the media game, who ends up having all these conversations and these relationships with these figures in American basketball. And I really truly don't matter in the equation. We all know how that is to be involved in one way or another. We're not the issue. But the memoir, if I did one, and it's ridiculous because I won't, I don't think a publisher would pay for it, but it would be that story. The questions I ask at certain times that change my career, some of those things, but it's ludicrous. You know, timing is everything. I don't care what life there is. And that's something for all of us to contemplate, the timing of our own existence.
Okay. Before I turn it over back to Vince, Sir Roland, Mr. Roland, someone wants to get a shout out from you. He's been reading your books. His name is Aldrin Magnay, or 3B Hoops. He's reading all of your books. He's asking for it. If you could give him a shout out.
I will. Can he hit me up on Twitter at Lazenby?
No, now actually he's
Oh
watching.
yeah, give me a shout out now, and also give you my condolences for having to suffer through all of those books. But some of them are pretty good, some of them not so much. But yes, a shout out. What is his name? Albert?
Aldrin Magnay.
Aldred, and you know, I'm a little slow on the uptake. I'm 68,
Yeah.
so I think I've got it correct now. Aldred,
Or just
brother,
or just call 3B Hoops.
3B Hoops.
Yeah.
Thank you for the support, brother, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. It is the thing that keeps me going. I'll get up every morning at 3:30 or 4 to start writing, and there it will be on Twitter. Somebody has read a book and they've sent me a note. And I can't tell you, Aldred, how powerful that is for me. It's not that I'm writing these books, I'm writing them sort of with a global audience. And, you know, I'll never forget when the internet came in. I had to do a column for Fox Sports. I'd never worked for Fox Sports before, so the internet was, you know, was getting a guy like me a little bit of showtime. And so I write this column, and like 10 minutes later, I get this email from a 13 or 14-year-old kid from Iceland who was an NBA fan. And I was just going, whoa. And what has happened is the mystery of the internet for all of us. We come in contact with people from all over the world. And this is particularly true in something like the phenomenal growth of basketball. So it's been great fun and part of God's mystery. Pardon me.
All right. Thank you so much, Vince.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
My last question, Mr. Lazenby. Um, if okay, have you thought of writing a biography for someone, and then you held back? Nah, maybe not.
Well, yes, I would say LeBron's in that category. But everything I do with lists a lot of times. My first book was a list. It's called Divergent Thinking. I taught media for a number of years, but all of my career has been idea driven. In other words, I wrote a biography of Phil Jackson called Mind Games, and I wrote that in 2000. And at the time I wrote it, there were literally hundreds of American journalists writing. There were people from all over the globe, and many of them had gotten to know Phil Jackson. I had my relationship with Tex Winter, which helped me understand him very good. But how was it that I ended up writing about Phil Jackson? Well, he was item number 3 on my list. I was making a list of 10 to 20 book ideas, but it doesn't just have to do with the ideas. Every time I do an interview, I'll do 50 questions and I'll throw out the bad ones. I don't worry when you do a list, you don't worry if it's a good or bad question. You don't worry if it's a good or bad idea. You just list them all and then you go through and pick out the ones that are logical and make sense and work. And it has always been a powerful part of my process, and it's added at least 100 points to my IQ. And it's available to all of us. And I do it with everything. I do it with even how I structure what I'm doing. I'll come to a section in the book, and I'm currently, after 2.5 years, I'm writing the last section of the Magic Johnson book. And just like for every one of them, I'll make a list of all the elements. And then I'll figure out which one is going to be the most engaging, the best way. And so it's lists of things that I use to organize my thinking. And I taught that to all of my students for 21 years in college. Most of them forget it before I finish talking about it. And it's just not human nature to remember things like that. But list making is a very powerful, organized way to achieve logic in your thinking and allows you to get ahead. And the other thing I'll add to that is interviewing, which I don't have to tell you guys about, but
Yeah.
I would encourage all of my students to engage in the age of technology, and I call it the best minds principle, to go out and interview the best minds available. And they're always available because people agree to do interviews. They're like I am. They are selling a product. They are vain. They are lovers of telling stories. There are all these reasons that people grant interviews. They love meeting other people. They have things that are very important to them they want to talk about. You can go down the list of all the things, reasons, good and bad. But that's good for all of us. It means that we have access to learn from the best minds. We have to have a pretty well organized podcast to do it, as you guys do. I commend you. Sometimes the people interview me in the podcast look just like me, like they've gotten out of bed in their bathrobe and cut on the computer screen. I've run into all sorts. It doesn't matter. I'm happy to do them all. But I love it when I see really professional things, particularly when people are pursuing items of their own passion. And so it's a great way of learning. And to me, that's the whole purpose of this. I think the reason I keep writing, I love learning. I was never a good student. I was in the bottom fourth of my high school class. I was lucky enough to get in Virginia Military Institute for college. I graduated last in my class there, but I just kept learning. And so I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but if you're open to learning from lots of people, and I learn from everyone, it's amazing what humans can do. And that's my point in all of it.
All right. And with that, Mr. Lazenby, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. Conversation's been great. I thank you for the time that you set aside for us. Um, we'd like to ask for your final words for our Filipino viewers.
Well, first of all, everything you just said, right back at you. This has been tremendous fun for me. It's been a tremendous honor. I especially enjoyed it because it gave me the opportunity to talk about your national basketball treasure. And I was telling him this in a Twitter message the other day. What an astounding figure to come in my life, Tim Cone. And what a great basketball teacher he's been for me. And he's a great guy. And so just the opportunity to express that about him and his personal generosity. And he started as a reader, reading Blood on the Horns. He's another learner, and the stories of how he arranged to get broadcasts of Bulls games and taught himself the triangle. I know for a fact that inspired Tex Winter tremendously. And so I don't think you could use a better example. Doesn't matter where you live in the world. Sometimes it helps to live in a collection of beautiful islands. But you may live in a war-torn European country, and that makes it harder anytime there's conflict. But the power of all of this is grand. Thank you so much.
And let us know when your new book is out.
Oh, I will. My publisher will be on me to do that. My wife is looking, oh boy, I get to hear my husband run his mouth for hours on this stuff. He'll just go, I can't believe I'm stuck here.
All right, Brian.
Well, it's an honor to meet you, Mr. Roland Lazenby. I have learned a lot, and you just don't know it, but those long answers, you're giving me a lot of things to write.
Thank you, Brian. The questions are what bring answers. And
Yes.
so it's just the whole exchange. It helps me to write too.
Mhm.
I'll just have conversations with a friend, and they'll ask me how the book's going. And there are writers, here we go in another long answer, but there are writers who won't even talk about what they're writing.
We got time, I think.
But I think the articulating of things brings revelation. Just trying to explain to other people yourself and what you're doing and your motives and your thoughts and experiences. Spoken language is the basis of all writing. And that's why I went to grad school. I had terrible grades, but my writing got me a full ride to go to a wonderful writing grad school. And the main lesson there was it's all about voice. And this morning I'm up at 4:00 reading this chapter aloud to myself for like the 10th time, taking out extra words, looking at, and so the articulating of what we know and what we don't know in the form of questions is all part of that process. It's like passing a basketball back and forth, So it's fun. This has been a fun session. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Lazenby.
I'm
Stay
not
safe.
Sir Lazenby. I've never been knighted. I've had some garbage thrown at me, but never knighted. But thank you for the honor.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Stay safe, sir.
Bye.
And